let's talk a little bit about relational organizing and movement building. And it sounds like we're in a room of experts. So I will ask that watch this. If it's stuff that you know in your gut, just take notes and think about this as a different way to talk about it to your activists, who I'm sure you speak to quite frequently about these types of things. So I'm going to start just talking about models of leadership, and this is the way that when we're opening our conversations on relational organizing with people at all levels of training, this is the way that we format and we begin the conversation. This little dot in the middle is supposed to represent a leader, and what oftentimes happens, and you all know this better than most, is that in traditional hierarchies or traditional structures, there's one leader and many followers. And the followers end up all going to the leader for everything. And the leader becomes overburdened, as this poor big dot looks, and is unable to do all the myriad jobs that they've taken on and all the hats that they have worn. How many people have been in the situation where you are the leader and all the arrows are pointing at you? I am that every day. Really fun. Okay, great. So this is like where we all naturally start. Like, it is just leadership. We all are perfectionists, we're all organizers, we're all leaders. People all come at us for things. And sometimes, if we're servant leaders, or if we have a committee of leaders alongside us, we can end up on the opposite side of the spectrum. And the opposite side of the spectrum oftentimes looks like this. So there are 5 leaders in a riding committee, in a riding, and each of them have decided to do their own things. How many people may have, closed your eyes and raise your hand, at all seen that type of thing happen? Nuh-uh. Yeah, me too. That's also my everyday. That's really fun. So this is another thing that we see happen all the time when well-meaning people get together and want to organize. So this Rubik's Cube looking thing is the strange visual that we've put together to chart out what we think, or what we've found is the best model for leadership and organizing that actually helps people get things done and do it in a way where they have clear roles and responsibilities. And this is called the Snowflake Model. How many people let's just do like a quick show of hands. How many people have heard of the Snowflake Model before? Great, perfect. All right. So the Snowflake Model is basically a model whereby there is one leader in the middle. Hierarchy matters, hierarchy is important. And then there are typically between 4 and 5 followers that have concrete roles, responsibilities, and expectations underneath that one leader. It's basically like a good organizational chart of any nonprofit or company that you would see, but we enforce it at the super hyper local level. And the 3 things that we found that are the most crucial about building neighborhood team structure with folks are thus. Number 1, form should follow function. So oftentimes what happens, and no one here is going to at all be familiar with this story because this has never happened to you, but is that something needs to be done in a community or within a group, and a group will come together and say, we want to pass electoral reform in our nationally, but particularly we want to organize our district around electoral reform, and they ask who's going to lead this effort. And the loudest person in the room says, I will lead this effort. What percentage of the time is that person who raises their hand first the right person to lead the effort? In my experience, not very often. And that is often the problem that we see in progressive politics, at least in the States. I'm sure it doesn't happen here, where the loudest people in the room are oftentimes the people who have appointed themselves leaders at the start of movements. Instead of saying, let's do this one house party, let's do this one thing together, and each person's going to take a different role, and then at the end of it, let's decide what our structure is. So we've been pretty militant, if if I dare use that word, about making sure that form follows function. And that as these chapters are doing their work, they're democratically electing their leaders, but we coach them at every step of the way to do some work together. Get your hands dirty together first. And be explicit at the top that we're not going to choose we're not going to choose the person who's loudest, we're going to choose the person who's done the most. So the second rule of neighborhood teams that we've learned the hard way and had to pound into people's brains is that clear responsibilities, roles, and goals are queen. Oftentimes as progressives, we are more flexible. We see the world in shades of gray more than our conservative friends and neighbors may. And so we like to say, you can be the recruitment person, but you can also be the data person, and let's just figure it out later. And we'll set some goals, but we're gonna focus on doing the work. That, in our experience, and I'm sure in yours as well, has never worked. And it is crucially important that after you've had that one little testing phase period where you let form follow function, the group sits down together and says, all right, who's going to be the data captain? Who's going to be the digital captain? And what are your goals? And what are your benchmark deadlines? And what are your metrics? And why? So that's the second important thing that we've found. And then the third important thing that we found, that's the key to the neighborhood team model, is training. So we'll talk in a bit later about all the different types of training that we do. But it's hard to get unpaid volunteers to stay activated, smart people to stay activated in their neighborhoods even when we reframe wins day in and day out for them. And so unless there is some, and it doesn't cost that much at all. Really, it's easy to do, webinars. We do a webinar a week with our volunteer leaders, and we'll have another volunteer leader who used to be a dorky accountant or a non-dorky accountant do a training on Excel. And like an hour-long training on Excel doesn't seem like something that would be super sexy to many folks. People eat that stuff up. And it really adds value to their organization and to their work and, to the outside life that they have planning their daughter-in-law's wedding when they want to use Excel too. So training keeps people engaged, keeps them involved, even when there aren't wins the whole way through. The last thing we found about relational organizing and neighborhood teams in particular is that there is a temptation with neighborhood teams and with this model of grassroots organizing, to hire a ton of staff everywhere, right? And put those staff locally, seed them locally, and it seems impossible to create, a neighborhood team model across the country when you think about how expensive that is and how little money you actually have because fundraising is really tough. So the biggest thing that we've done that loosens up staff, resources, and money is, again, part of that letting go control thing. We've actually connected the neighborhood team leaders to each other. And so we built this tool that is just called Connect, because it's about letting volunteer leaders across issues, across states, across the country connect to each other. So if you or your organization wants to steal Connect, just copy paste it. And use it for your own ends to connect your volunteers laterally across all those 70 chapters that you talked about earlier. Steal away. Because it's our view that when we don't open source these technologies that we create, every time we spend $1 billion on a presidential campaign or tens of millions of dollars on issue advocacy campaigns, we're setting ourselves back. And unless everyone has access to these types of technology, and I'll just go off on a tangent for 1 second about the states because I'm daily livid about this. Look at the United States Republican Party. What a disaster. And I believe that the place that they've landed, the polarized place that they've landed in on the Republican side, it's for a few reasons, but one of the primary reasons that they have Donald Trump and Ted Cruz who vehemently hate each other and their bases hate each other and everyone in the establishment middle is totally befuddled, is they haven't invested in grassroots community organizing or letting their party talk to each other, talk through issues over the past 8 years. They've invested in paid media and ads. And sure, maybe that'll win you an election. But in building a connected populace who's engaged and who understands each other and has shared visions and values and is able to articulate what their movement means and entails and stands for, unless we have community organizing tools like this that allow people to talk laterally, and we're doing it in between elections, good luck. All right, so one last emphasis on the set clear expectations and let our organizers go. Have folks heard about the Supreme Court vacancy battle in the United States? It's a whole thing. So we are the primary group that's pushing for the Supreme Court to fill the Supreme Court vacancy. And as you know, Republicans have said in a completely unprecedented way that they refuse to do their job and vote, even do an up or down vote, as they're required to do under the US Constitution, to fill this vacancy, one of our key arms of our executive branch. So this all happened sort of all of a sudden. Justice Scalia passed away on a Saturday evening over a long weekend. And progressive groups across the United States all sort of froze. And we're like, we haven't done a Supreme Court vacancy battle in quite a while. Who has what resources? How can we work together? How can we leverage labor unions, and how can we leverage Center for American Progress and all these other groups that are key leaders on this type of fight? But because we hadn't done it for a while, it took us a second. OFA, because we had grassroots chapters who are trained and ready and working on many issues at once already, we were able to put together the day of action, a week after the Supreme Court vacancy became a thing. And Senator Mitch McConnell happened to say an hour after Justice Scalia's death that he refused to do his job and vote. So we had a little bit more of a runway. We were able to put together a massive day of action and lead the coalition across the country in really demanding in district offices that these senators on the Judiciary Committee do their job. And so setting clear expectations and letting your organizers go, although it feels like letting go of control many times, for us has allowed us to be more nimble and flexible because they're there when you need them. And we hold frequent trainings to help ensure quality control. I will keep saying that ad nauseum. I'd like folks to wager a guess how many grassroots staff we have managing all these efforts. You can just yell it out. Thousands of grassroots staff. Who else? Just yell. 5? 20? 50? 100? 250? 1,500. Oh my God, I wish. All right. We have one grassroots staffer managing all this. We have 3 training staff who travel the country and hold trainings and organize our trainings in Chicago. But it's not that expensive. And granted, listen, I'm not going to deny, we inherited a lot of assets and we had $1 billion investment of a presidential campaign, but that was 4 years ago. 20% of our volunteers every year are new to the progressive movement. They didn't volunteer in 8, they didn't volunteer in 12. They came in because of the issues. They came in because they had a kid who was affected by the Affordable Care Act and they want to help other people get enrolled. Or they came in because they had an abortion and they want to make sure that women all have a right to choose. And so through setting clear expectations, setting achievable goals, reframing the win day in and day out, keeping folks updated and connected centrally via social media and laterally via this Connect tool that you should all copy, paste, and steal. We've been able to pull all this off with 1 grassroots staffer and 3 training staff in the nation. And it costs us, and to those of you who do this, it costs us, it sounds like a lot, but for this type of work, it's actually not. Something like $750,000 a year total to run this wing of our programming, which isn't a lot for how big the impact is and for how much other similar organizations spend because they're not relying on volunteers, they're relying on staff. most of our budget goes towards digital stuff, which is a whole nother conversation that we will have in another day.